Every new year, people promise they're going to become better. They make resolutions, they draw lines in the sand, they say things like, "This year, I'm finally going to change." But for a lot of people, what they really mean is, "This year, I'm going to be harder on myself." January doesn't feel like a fresh start for everyone. For some people, it feels like a reminder of everything they didn't fix last year. You look back at 2025 and you don't just see lessons, you see regrets. Moments you wish you handled differently, things you said, things you didn't say, choices you can't undo. And instead of letting that clarity guide you, you turn it into a weapon. You tell yourself, "I can't mess up this year. I don't get another chance. If I fail again, it proves I haven't grown." So you enter the new year already exhausted, not because you haven't changed yet, but because you're already at war with yourself. A lot of people think that's discipline. They think that's kind of pressure is what finally forces change. But if that were true, you would have already become the person you're trying to be. Here's the truth no one tells you at the start of a new year. You can't hate yourself into becoming better. You can scare yourself into compliance, and you can shame yourself into short-term improvement. But you cannot build a new life on a foundation of self-loathing. And the reason right now, the start of 2026, matters, isn't because the calendar changed. It's because this is usually the moment people decide whether they're going to repeat the same internal cycle or finally try a different one. If you go into 2026 with the same voice in your head, the same threats, the same self-contempt, the same fear of messing up, you'll get the same results. Not because you're incapable, but because your system never changed. So if you're watching this at the start of the year, I'm not asking you to become a completely different person overnight. I'm asking you to question whether the way you've been trying to change is actually helping. Maybe 2026 isn't about pushing harder. Maybe it's about finally stopping the war and building something from a place that doesn't require you to hate yourself first. A lot of people believe the reason they're changing is because they finally hate themselves enough. They think self-loathing is discipline, that shame is what keeps them in line, that if they stop being hard on themselves, they'll become careless, lazy, or worse, the version of themselves they're trying to escape. But what if that belief is the very thing keeping you stuck? We live in a culture that rewards self-criticism. If you say you hate who you used to be, people call that growth. If you talk badly about yourself, it sounds like accountability. But no one really asks whether it's working. Because on the surface, it looks like you're productive, you're aware, you're reflective, you're hard on yourself. But awareness without compassion doesn't lead to change. It leads to paralysis. A lot of people don't actually believe in themselves. They threaten themselves. They say things like, "I can't mess up again. If I do, it proves I'm trash." That's not motivation, that's fear. Fear can push you forward for a while, but it can't sustain growth. For me, self-hatred started pretty early, around the age of 12. I got picked on a lot in school. I was bigger, I was weaker. I didn't really have many close friends, and I didn't have a solid structure to rely on when I needed it. So what did I do? I let them win. All the hate I received on the outside slowly started reflecting inward. I barely recognized myself. I started changing, but not in the way that came from growth. It came from hatred. I forced myself to go to the gym, not because I wanted to, but because I felt worthless if I didn't. I changed my eating to the point of near starvation just to see results faster. I ended up losing 100 pounds, and in hindsight, I'm incredibly proud of that milestone. But at the time, I was miserable. Even after everything I'd accomplished, it was never enough. I had developed body dysmorphia. I could be stronger, leaner, more attractive, and still feel like I was failing. I didn't just want to be better, I had to be the best. At the time, I thought being cruel to myself was the price of becoming better. Here's the dangerous part. Self-hatred works in the short term. It creates urgency, it creates pressure, it creates a version of you that's terrified of going backward. But pressure doesn't create alignment, it creates compliance. It makes you believe there's a law that you can't break, and that if you do, you're no longer enough. And eventually, the system breaks. When you rely on self-hatred to improve, you create a cycle. You mess up, you attack yourself, you temporarily improve, You exhaust yourself, then you slip, and then you hate yourself even more. And every time you fail, the punishment gets harsher. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that sounds almost offensive until you really sit with it. It said, "Reject your sense of injury, and the injury itself disappears." He's not saying nothing hurt you. He's not saying what happened didn't matter. He's saying the moment you let the wound keep deciding who you are, that's when the injury becomes permanent. A lot of people think continuing to suffer means they're taking responsibility, but most of the time, it just means they've surrendered control to the past. People who hate themselves don't fail because they don't care. They fail because they don't feel safe. Growth requires mistakes. But if every mistake comes with emotional violence, your brain learns to avoid growth altogether. After losing all that weight, I had burned out. I'd been consistent in the gym for a long time, and being that hard on myself slowly drained me. Eventually, even self-hatred wasn't enough to keep me going. I was tired. I was missing out on things I used to enjoy. By that time, I was lucky enough to have found a friend group that still supports me today, but I was too exhausted to even show up for them. My progress stopped, and I broke down. I wasn't lazy. I was exhausted from consistently being at war with myself. Real discipline doesn't come from hatred. It comes from self-respect. Self-respect says, I don't like this behavior, so I'm changing it. Self-hatred says, I don't like myself, so I deserve to suffer. Only one of those leads somewhere sustainable. There's another line from Marcus Aurelius that cuts through all of this. It says, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. That's not a call to be perfect. It's a call to stop living inside your head. Endless self-analysis doesn't make you moral. Endless self-criticism doesn't make you disciplined. At some point, thinking about how bad you are becomes another way to avoid becoming better. For people who relied on self-criticism their entire lives, kindness feels impossible or irresponsible. It feels like letting yourself off the hook. But there's a difference between compassion and permission. Compassion says, I understand why I did this and I'm choosing differently. Excuses say, it's fine, it doesn't matter. Those are not the same. I'm not a perfect man, but I've grown enough to recognize my self-hatred. Lately, I've been at a low, but I've been responding to it differently. I still go to the gym, not to destroy my body, not to be the strongest, but to clear my mind. Instead of being on my phone between sets, I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And outside the gym, I started going to coffee shops and stores just to read and be around people instead of isolating. I didn't think it would help, but it did. Not because I hated myself into change, but because I wanted to grow, naturally. I didn't become softer, I became more consistent. We've been taught that growth has to hurt, so when it stops hurting, we assume something's wrong. But pain isn't proof of progress. Change is. If you hate yourself into becoming better, you eventually arrive somewhere, and you still hate yourself, because you never learned how to be on your own side. Lasting change comes from clarity, patience, accountability, and self-respect. Not shame, and not humiliation, not emotional self-harm. I'm not done growing, and I don't think that the journey ever really ends, but my inner voice sounds different now. It's quieter, less cruel, more supportive. And my relationships with others and with myself are healthier because there's more respect than there ever was before. I don't need to rush anymore. I have time to live better. If the only way you know how to improve is by hating yourself, I want you to hear this clearly. That's not strength, that's survival. You don't change because you hate who you are. You change because you respect who you could become. Self-hatred might get you started, but it will never get you home. You don't become better by punishing yourself. You become better by staying with yourself long enough to grow. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. I hope this helped you in some way, because I think it's really important that we love ourselves to grow rather than hating it. And it's really important that it's done organically rather than through some external force like hatred. If you got any other recommendations for video ideas or topics, let me know in the comments. I love you guys, And goodbye. Have a great day.